Hi everyone, it's Phil here from Ashland Leather, and I thought it'd be a really good idea to bring out all my footwear on the table and polish them up with some Horserump Venetian Shoe Cream that I just received. We've got these back in stock now, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to polish up all my stuff because some of this is really neglected, as you're about to see. So on the table, about 25 different pairs of stuff, everything from Viberg to Alden. We've got some Oak Street, Wolverine, Sebaco, some old Florsheins. So we'll look at each of these 25 pairs in their current state, and then I'll polish them up one by one with the Venetian Cream. There are many different leathers represented in the footwear here, so we'll be able to see how the Venetian Cream is very versatile from everything from shell Cordovan to chrome XL and some other leathers too. All right, let's take a look at the boots as they are first. The first one up is a pair of Indy boots in the Pecan Austin leather from Horserump. I forget if these are called the 405s. I think these are 405s. And these are not in the original state. I actually replaced the bottoms on there with some day-night soles. I think I'm one of the only people to have ever worn out some Neocork soles. And next up, I've got another pair of Indy boots. These are, I believe they're called the 403s. These are the brown chrome XL versions. And we'll stick with Alden for the beginning here. This is the Roy boot from Context Clothing. RIP. This is a plain toe brown chrome XL boot with a crepe sole, and these Roy boots have the berry last from Alden, unlike the Indy boots that have the True Balance last. Another pair of Aldens here that I have not worn in a while. These are shoes in brown chrome XL. I believe Alden calls these the all-weather walkers, and they have a little bit of a lug sole on the bottom. And here's one of two shell Cordovan boots. This is one of the boots I get complimented on most often. This is a Viberg plain toe boot, natural shell Cordovan. This is a day-night sole with some gold hardware. Another plain toe boot here is one of my first loves. These are the 1,000 Mile boot from Wolverine, and the laces have been changed on these. They're now like a nice little olive green color. And these 1,000 Mile boots, these are some of the first that Wolverine made back in the day, maybe like 12 years ago. And I thought those brown chrome XL 1,000 Mile boots were so comfortable that I picked up another pair of 1,000 Miles here. These, I believe, are a leather called Harvest Inferno. I don't think they make this color anymore. It's a little bit more of like a yellowy tan. And here's another old one you can see, very dusty. This is color number 8 chrome XL on Clark's Desert boot. The reason I picked these up a long time ago, I think this was the first time that Clark's was using Horserump chrome XL in any of their boots. If you couldn't tell, I really like plain toe boots. I seem to have a lot of them. This is the Grant Stone diesel boot in natural chrome XL. I really like the rawhide laces on these. Here's another one from Grant Stone, same boot as we just looked at, but this is black chrome XL on the diesel boot. And this black chrome XL has a really nice framed out look with the natural colored welt and the leather sole on the bottom. And these are one of my more recent pickups, so I haven't worn these too much. Speaking of recent pickups, this is also a Grant Stone boot. This is the field boot in the Walnut Bison. I haven't really worn it too much. I got these just before getting my most recent Thunderdome pair. And one more Grant Stone pair here. I think they call these the long wing shoes. And this is in natural chrome XL. This is actually the second pair that I ever picked up from Grant Stone. And these just don't fit me as perfectly as I'd like, so I haven't worn them as much as some of the other stuff. Oh, I lied. There's one more Grant Stone pair. This is actually the pair I've been wearing today. And this is the Grant Stone brass boot in tan Essex. And these have a lug sole and that little bit of mock toe on the front. And I am double doming right now. So here's the other pair of boots that I'm currently wearing for the Stitched on Patina Thunderdome. This is the Oak Street field boot. It's got a nice little cap toe with some perforations. And this is in a Maryam Horserump in the natural color. These have a different sole on the bottom. This is called a Goodyear Chemigum sole. And here's another pair from Oak Street. This is a pair that I wore last year in natural chrome XL leather. These also have a leather sole that I actually wore through, and it took about 6 months to wear through these. And I think it's because the leather soles that Oak Street used on these particular pair are very thin, but they are also really comfortable. Next up, these are a pair of Jim Greens. Now, these are actually a pair that I won for being best in brand for those Oak Street boots you just saw from the first round of the Stitched on Patina Thunderdome. These were the pair that I won from that. And I haven't been able to wear these too often just because I got them just as this year's Patina Thunderdome was starting, so these don't have much wear on them at all. Now here's a super fun pair. This is a pair from Converse, and these are the Dr. J sort of high top sneakers. And I remember when these came out, it's been a while, maybe over a decade here. This was also the first time that I started to see some Horween leathers being used in sneakers. And I believe this is the less oil content version of Horween's Chrome XL leather. This is a leather called Beaufort, I think. And it's got a combination of color 8 and black on the backstay. And here's a pair of some vintage Florsheins I actually picked up on eBay a couple of years ago. This is what I believe is color number 8, shell Cordovan. It kind of looks like color 4 in some sections, but these are sort of the standard long wings in shell Cordovan. All right, let's get into some mock toes. This is a Timberland pair, also in Chrome XL leather, and I believe that these were made by Rancourt. This is a really comfortable pair, although I haven't worn them very much, and they're very, very stylish, almost more of like a dressy mock toe sort of slipper thing. Here's another mock toe, one of the earliest pairs that Oak Street Bootmaker was making. This is navy Chrome XL with that crepe sole and the rawhide laces. These actually didn't fit me perfectly, but I did wear them a lot, and I really liked seeing some of the boat shoes that Quoddy was making back in the day in the navy Chrome XL, and they had sort of like a red brick sole on them that I really enjoyed. And then I noticed my buddy George over at Oak Street was making these in navy, so I had to pick them up. And here's another one from Rancourt. You can see they've sort of been abused here. They're kind of deflated, like something was sitting on top of them. These are also in brown Chrome XL. Another boat shoe here. This time it's in a different version of Chrome XL. This is a version called Cavalier Chrome XL, and these are from Sebaco. And the reason I picked these up, again, about a dozen years ago, was because this was the first time our brand new leather at that time, Cavalier Chrome XL, was being made into anything. And what the Cavalier Chrome XL allowed a boat shoemaker to do was to get some of these brighter colors. So back then, I think Sebago was making some like red and orange and really vibrant colors of this style. Another mock toe here. This time it is in black Chrome XL, and it's a little bit more of like a chukka boot. These are also made by Quoddy, and what's a little bit different about these, you got black Chrome XL on the sides, and on the bottoms, this is actually a softer leather sole. This is a leather called Chrome Pack, which is a variation again on the Chrome XL. It's just a little bit more dense and very, very thick. So these are almost more casual, like lounging around the house style shoes. And the last one of the before look here, these are perhaps my most abused pair of anything ever. This is one of the boat shoes that Oak Street Bootmaker originally released when they first opened. Again, I think it was about 12 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, 13 years ago. I don't know when they started, but I've really worn the hell out of these. And you can see they're very, very deflated. I was actually using these to do a lot of yard work and then left them outside. So they've been incredibly abused. I think it'll be a good opportunity to see how well we can upgrade these terrible looking shoes. All right, very briefly on the methodology for what I'm going to be doing here. The goal is to be able to see what this Venetian Shoe Cream does on all of these different boots and all the different leather tannages. And in order to do that, I think the best move, and you might have noticed all these shoes and boots look pretty deflated because of how poorly they've been stored. So I think the first move is going to be to stuff all of these with paper. So filling up the volume on this shoe immediately transforms the look of it, and I think this is how I'll go about polishing it. All right, let's get to work on the polishing here. It's going to be a lot of work to do to get through all 25 of these pairs, and in fact, I wanted to tell you that I'm going to do sort of what I call a quick polishing, so I'm not really going to put a lot of effort into making these things look like new. The whole goal, again, is just to see what the Venetian Shoe Cream does on each of these different leathers. So we'll start off with the classic Indy boots, the 405s. I heard there's actually a new Indiana Jones coming out pretty soon, maybe next year. The other thing I'm going to do is only polish one of each of the boots, so we have something to compare it to after the fact. This Indy boot here does not need a lot of polishing. In fact, if this was something I was going to wear, I'd be happy to put it on my foot right now. I think it hasn't been worn too much since it was polished most recently. All right, so we got the Venetian Shoe Cream here, and the instructions say recommended use: remove surface dirt, apply evenly with soft cloth, allow to sit for 5 minutes, brush with a fine quality brush, buff with a soft cloth. All right, so the first thing I normally do is brush them off. And I actually have two different brushes here that I'll use. This is sort of my dry brush that we're just going to remove the dust with, a little bit of the surface dirt, and then later I have another brush over here that we'll use once the Venetian has been applied. All right, so shake it up a little bit. This material tends to separate as it sits around, and this is a brand new batch that I just got in from Horween Leather. So I like to put it on with my finger And I only really want to get just like a light hazy look to it. If you put too much on of any polish, including the Venetian cream, it just starts to look like polish. It kind of just looks hazy and cloudy because you're just seeing polish. You're not really seeing the leather anymore. So I do it to the point where I start to see just like a small amount of form on the surface. Something I've noticed about these Indy boots too is that the faux mock toe here, the stitching on the front, it kind of starts to get a little bit dirty looking when you put some polishes on there. So if you want that clean, you might want to avoid putting polish on the stitching of the mock toe. So I've actually had really good results applying it with my finger, and then I like to sort of buff all the polish in with soft cloth here, and then later I like to bring back the luster a little bit more with the horsehair brush. I don't know what it is. There's something about this buffing with the soft cloth that's pretty good by itself, and then the brushing sort of raises that grain character back up a little bit. Not really sure how to describe that. It's almost like the buffing sort of flattens everything out, and then the brushing kind of raises it back up. All right, so here we are after a little bit of soft cloth, Venetian soft cloth. You can see the difference, or I can see the difference. The luster is already greatly improved. So if I were to wear these out tonight, this is probably all I would do. Just a really light application of Venetian cream, buff it in with the cloth, and then give it a brushing. And so here's the comparison from the old to the new on the right. You can see it's a little bit cleaner looking, obviously with all that dust on there, and it's just a little bit brighter. So it has like a little bit more of a wet look to it. All right, another Indy boot, this time in the brown Chrome XL. So let's get rid of the dust. So most of the time, that's all you really need to do is just give the boot a little bit of a brushing. So nothing has been applied to this yet. So just cleaning off that dust layer on the Chrome XL and then brushing it gives a good result normally. And that's because the Chrome XL leather has a really good amount of waxes and oils already tanned inside of it. So all you really need to do is reactivate those. But the Venetian cream will give us a little bit of an added fill and a little bit of additional luster. So the amount you see here, this might be a bit on the heavy end of the amount of Venetian that I normally use, but you want to see just like a slight bit of haziness, a little bit of cloudy sort of white look, especially when you see it against the brown on the back there. It's sort of just cloudy is where you need it to be before you start buffing it in. All right, before and after on the brown Chrome XL here. All right, two more brown Chrome XL pairs from Alden. This one here is actually a boot that I love very much. These are the pair of boots that I wore when I got married. And on the left one here, it's got a pretty big scuff in the front. So I was only going to do the right of each pair. On this one, I might try to fill in that scuff a little bit just to see what we can do there. All right, let's look at this big abrasion in the front. If I look closely, I can really see that it's sort of scuffed off the grain layer. So we're seeing a little bit of like that suede look underneath. We should be able to fill it in a little bit, but I don't think we're ever going to make that disappear. All right, let's go back to the original boot here. Give it a little bit of a buffing with soft cloth. I think this needs a little bit more in the back here. All right, here's what this one looks like after the Venetian buffing and a little bit of brushing. It looks pretty nice. Now let's take a look at the one with that abrasion on the toe. See if we can clean that up a little bit more. It's not the worst, but still you can see that abrasion on the toe pretty well, but it's a little bit more hidden. Okay, shoes. More brown Chrome XL from Alden, which obviously I'm a big fan of, and another plain toe. Big fan of the plain toes. Okay, those are pretty dusty. Let's go on to the Venetian. gonna buff it in with the t-shirt here, soft cloth. Looks pretty dramatic difference just with that, and I think the brushing that'll do now will make it even better. All right, there's our final after the Venetian buffing and then a little bit of brushing. You can really see how much difference there is on this pair here. All right, let's move on to the first pair of shell Cordovan shoes or boots that we have here. These are Viberg plain toe boots in the 110 last natural shell Cordovan. First thing I'll do is I'll try to brush off this dirt, and these I'm expecting to get really nice just with a little bit of the moisture from the Venetian Shoe Cream. I've done some videos in the past where all I did was put water on this leather and brush it, and it really brings it back to life. All right, let's put a little bit of Venetian on this natural shell. It's immediately darker. Okay, buff this one up with the cloth. So you can see the Venetian and just a little bit of buffing goes a long way with the shell here. So now let's brush this, and I think we'll even get more of a bright luster. But the big thing I'm noticing is the color difference. Maybe the dirt and dust on here are just changing the color that much. All right, there we go. Natural shell Cordovan Vibergs with some Venetian buffing and brushing. Next up are Dune Chrome XL, aka Natural Chrome XL Diesel Boots from Grant Stone. Give these a little brush. They actually look pretty nice just after brushing, but I think the Venetian will fill in the grain of this Chrome XL a little bit more. So it should look a little bit flatter and of course brighter because of the waxes in the Venetian. And I'll buff it up with the soft cloth again. Sometimes on these creases, I actually like to get inside and raise up that pebbling with my hand from underneath to clean out some of the dirt inside the creases. All right, and a little brushing to finish this guy off. And a little before and after for this one. It's definitely a little bit more filled in. It actually kind of felt a little bit dry before putting the Venetian on this particular pair, but it's looking good, really good right now. Another pair of diesel boots from Grant Stone. These don't need a ton of work because I haven't worn them too much, although I have worn them a bit. I do like them very much. So just a little brushing here. This might, you know, if this was a normal day for me, that's probably all I do here. Just give them a little brush. But let's see what the Venetian gives us on the black Chrome XL. So a quick side note here, I'm noticing this black Chrome XL doesn't seem to accept as much of the Venetian, meaning that I don't have to put as much on as that last pair with the natural Chrome XL. The natural felt really dried out, so it almost seemed like it needed more in some spots. So I think that might be the small amount of art to this is, you know, if it feels dry, you can add a little bit more, but if it's feeling pretty saturated and smooth, you might not want to add anything. And we'll give this one a little bit of a buffing. That looks pretty good there. It was pretty good to start, and then just finish it off with a little bit more brushing. Okay, before and after on the black Chrome XL diesel boots. That one really filled in nicely. All right, another Grant Stone pair. These are actually the pair of brass boots that I'm wearing for this year's Patina Thunderdome. I conditioned these, or Venetian cream these, about 2 weeks ago. So it doesn't really need too much. Maybe just like a little bit of a brushing on here, but let's see what the Venetian does to this tan Essex leather. So surprisingly, this Essex is actually feeling a little bit dry. Like it does actually need a little bit of this Venetian. So maybe I was wrong. The visual before this actually looked pretty good, but it's feeling like a little bit dried out. So I think the Venetian might actually be appropriate here. Okay, a little bit of buffing for this guy. Okay, that's what it looks like after buffing. Definitely a little bit more filled in, definitely brighter and cleaner looking. Now I'll just do that final brushing. And there you go, brushed up. That actually kind of does look like it needs it. More filled in, definitely cleaner looking, and a little bit brighter. And 2 more pairs from Grant Stone. We're gonna work on these Walnut Bison field boots here. These have only been worn twice, so not a whole lot to do on them. Give them a quick brush here. That's sort of the same story with these. I'm kind of surprised how much I am feeling like it needs a little bit of Venetian. It's because the leather's just feeling a little bit dried out, even though these haven't been worn too much. So maybe they've been sitting around, and I'm not really sure why that is. But it does seem like it's accepting and needing a lot of this Venetian at the moment. Okay, a little bit of a buffing. And with this one, all these deep ridges in the Bison pattern, some of that Venetian is sort of sunken in. So if you look in the valleys of that pattern here, you might be able to see a little bit of the Venetian sitting in there. So that's, I think, where the brushing comes into play. So let's give them a little brush. Yeah, so maybe that didn't need a ton of it, but it seems to have improved the look of the leather and the feel quite a bit. So here's the before and the after on the Walnut Bison field boots. And the last pair of Grant Stone I mentioned in the earlier part of the show that I haven't worn these a bunch, but you can see I've worn them a little bit. These are actually really holding up nicely. So these don't look like they need a whole bunch. In fact, again, if these were mine and I wanted to wear them tonight, I don't think I'd do much more than just give them a little brush. But let's see what the Venetian does, because on the other pair of natural Dune Chrome XL, those diesel boots a minute ago, it really seemed like those loved getting a little bit of extra nourishment. So let's see what happens here. Now these don't really feel as dried out as those diesel boots. And I'll give this one a little bit of a buffing, but I think with the perforations on here, I'm gonna need the brush to get some of that wax out of here. Definitely a slight improvement, a little bit more of a sort of wet glossy look on these now. All right, another pair of wingtips and the only other pair of shell Cordovan items. So let's brush these off first. A little bit of Venetian. Okay, a little buffing for this guy. So that looks pretty improved. I think this one's absolutely going to need a brush for all these little perfs. Okay, before and after for these old Florsheins. And I'm starting to think that this top color here might be color 4, and then the larger sections on the bottom of the long wings might be color 8, because there's some tonal variety here that you might be able to see. Here's a pair of Converse, the Dr. J style, and I'm really looking forward to seeing these polish up, because I think they've been sitting around for at least 5 years. I can't remember the last time I wore these. So let's polish these guys up. They definitely need to get rid of some of this dirt here. So that's sort of the magic of Chrome XL right there. All I did was brush them, and it's really reinvigorated some of the waxes that were tanned into this leather. So not only did we remove some of the dirt, but we're already starting to restore some of the luster. But I think the Venetian will give us an increased amount of luster and some of that additional fill to the leather. All right, that's really gross. I thought some of this Venetian might clean off some of this gumminess. It's kind of loosening up a little bit, but this is really gross. It must be like gum or something. So we got a little bit of Venetian on here. Let's give it a buffing. And then lastly, a little bit of a brushing. These still look kind of rough, if I'm honest. I think the leather's just like a loose cut on the toe here. Before and after on some colorate, I believe these are Beaufort Chrome XL Dr. J's from Converse. Really big difference on this one. I think a lot of it has to do with that dirt on the surface, but the Venetian certainly has breathed a little bit of life back into the luster and even the color of this shoe. And this is the other pair of boots that I'm wearing for the Thunderdome. These are the Oak Street Field boots in Maryam Horserump. So it's sort of like the shell Cordovan in sections, but not as bright and smooth and flat as an actual piece of shell. So I'll give these a little bit of a brush first. They don't need a whole lot. I also polished these about 2 weeks ago. And Venetian cream. Immediately darker. This leather does feel a little bit drier than I thought it would. So I'm imagining it might need a little bit more product than some of the other stuff. And we'll buff it up. And then finally, brush. Pretty big difference on these in terms of color and luster. They're actually a little bit more lively in color now and definitely a little bit brighter. Here's another Oak Street pair. This is the pair that I wore last year for the Patina Thunderdome in natural Chrome XL. So we'll give these a little brush first to get the dust off. So these look super dried out, so I feel like it's gonna want a lot of product. We'll see what happens here. Yeah, these are really, really dry feeling, so I'm gonna put a tiny bit extra until they don't feel dry anymore. All right, buff them up. A little bit better there, and honestly these still feel pretty dried out, so I'm wondering if they actually need a conditioning at this point, but let's see what the Venetian does for us after brushing. Definitely an improvement, definitely a little bit more nourished, but I think it still needs a little bit of something else, which I don't think is appropriate for this video right now, but you can see increased luster. The color is a little bit nicer. I think we cleaned a lot of the dirt off of there. And that might be a lot of it. Just it seems very dirty and kind of dry and chapped feeling. But I wore these through the winter in the salt and stuff. So I don't know why it's happening, but it might just be because they've been worn a lot through pretty tough conditions. But you can see the Venetian Shoe Cream has increased the luster a dramatic amount. More old boots, more plain toe boots. This is the 1,000 Mile boot in brown Chrome XL, one of the oldest pairs that I have. So let's clean these up. And so just brushing those alone, that might be all it really needs, but let's see what the Venetian adds to it. So I'm feeling like the Venetian and maybe just a little buffing here might be all this one needs to really restore it. But what I'm looking to get is just some of that shine back, which was still a little dirty before. So I think cleaning off the dust might be the biggest thing here. Looking pretty good. Let's just compare really quick before and after here. Just cleaning them up a bit with that dirt really helps a lot. These did feel a little bit dried out, but surprisingly not as dried out as some of those other Chrome XL boots we looked at a minute ago. So even just with a quick brushing there, this one is very much transformed. It's got much more of a sort of wet look now. Now these are really dirty. So on a normal circumstance, I would probably wash these with soap and water. In fact, I don't think a lot of this dirt is going to come out of here. On one of these lighter colors, something that's a little bit of a drier leather like this Harvest Inferno, sometimes it doesn't repel that dirt as well as like a more waxy leather, or I suppose conceal the dirt. We got a lot of dirt on this one, but there is some cleaning properties to the Venetian, so we'll see what it does on this boot here. So just a little bit of the dust off with this brushing. I'm gonna need a lot more Venetian for this one. And this feels really, really dried out. I don't know if these have ever been polished. might be part of why it's so dramatically dirty. And also really soaking up this color of the Venetian. So that might be another word of caution here, and we'll see what it looks like when it dries out. But this product might darken up some lighter color leathers. All right, let's see if buffing gets some of this dirt out. Still looks really dirty. The color is much darker, more brown, a little bit less of that yellow sort of harvest color that it once was. Interesting to note though is on the shaft of the boot, on the inside quarter here, it's still got that lighter color. So I'm wondering if some of this darkness is either sections of the skin that have been abraded and scuffed, that have become darker once I've applied some of this Venetian cream to it. Maybe that's darkening up some more of those scuffed areas. Where on the shaft of the boot, it still seems pretty vibrant and pretty yellow. All right, still really dirty looking, but much brighter than before. This actually kind of looks neat. It's almost like an antique look now. So let's just give it that final brushing like everything else. Pretty interesting look on this one. Definitely brighter, wetter looking. Still really dirty. Didn't get a ton of that dirt cleaned out of there like I was thinking might happen. I think it did get some of it, but it still looks like kind of a dirty old boot. It's almost more of like an antique look now, which is actually pretty neat. Okay, a couple more plain toes to look at. The Clark's Desert Boot color number 8 Chrome XL. Kind of excited to see how these look. We'll dust off the surface of the leather here just very quickly. And it kind of seems like a lot of that dust is still remaining in some of the creases here. Also, as I felt that, this leather feels really, really dry. So we might need a little bit of extra Venetian cream here. It's kind of interesting, the sides of the boot actually feel kind of fine, like normal Chrome XL, but the toe is super dried out feeling. Buff this one up, and I know that I haven't been waiting the prescribed amount of time. It says to let these sit for 5 minutes. I think the buffing with the cloth kind of expedites some of that a little bit. But you might have a little bit of different results if you let it sit. I've just noticed that this works well for me, that I've done in the past, sort of what I call a quick polishing. You don't have to baby it too much. I'm just trying to get it presentable. I'm not trying to restore them back to new. And then just a little brushing on the end to hopefully get that luster even a brighter shine. Okay, before and after on the Color 8 Chrome XL Clark's Desert Boot. Still a little bit funky looking, like a little bit of a loose break on the toe of this one, which is actually funny because it's the same on the Converse. So the two least expensive pair of Chrome XL shoes seem to have the worst break. So it might have to do with something of the cutting in those factories. And another plain toe. These have only been worn for a day, so I don't know how much the Venetian will do to this leather from Jim Green on these Jim Green Razorbacks. But let's try it out anyways and see what happens. Yeah, not much to do here. Let's give this a little bit of a buff. And finally, a brushing on these. These are probably going to be the least transformed out of all the pairs. They're pretty good to start. All right, and a before and after on these guys. Maybe just got rid of a little bit of the dirt here. It's almost like the color is slightly more red also. Maybe that doesn't translate on the video here, but in person it looks slightly more red. And let's get into some mock toes. Now these are a pair from Timberland that I believe Rancourt has made in Maine. So we'll dust them off a little bit. These haven't been worn very much. And I noticed that they look really long. There's something about mock toes, in particular the hand-sewn plug mock toes, the non-Indy boot ones, that make boots look a little long. Even like the brass boots that I've been wearing recently for the Thunderdome, I'm noticing they just kind of look long to me. That's the same with these here, but the leather looks really good on these. So let's see how they polish up. Some pretty nice Chrome Excel on these, some of the nicest Chrome Excel that I have seen. They don't need like a lot of help. All right, we'll give it a buff. And a little bit of a brush. These don't need a whole lot. All right, before and after on these, I think pretty much all we did was knock the dirt off, but the Chrome Excel on this pair is really, really nice. Another pair here from Rancourt, some hand-sewn boat shoes. Clean off the dirt first. And these look a little bit more dried out than that last pair, probably because they've actually been used more than a handful of times. Super, super dried out on the plug here and on the front. Okay, time to polish them up. Time to give it a little buffing. And a brush. And there's your before and after. Definitely a much more filled in and cleaned up look. Definitely brighter and shinier. Here's another fun mock toe, the Cavalier Chrome Excel. I think this color was called Golf Green. And before I do the Venetian, I think I need to dust it off a little bit. These also look a little bit dried out, almost like a pale green color just from time, but I think it's like a little bit more of a rich, like Coke bottle green. At least that's what it used to be. So let's see what the Venetian does for it here. Much cleaner without the dust, right? So let's give it a quick buff. And then just a little brushing, especially around the plug here. I'd say that's a really good improvement very, very quickly. Another pair here from Oak Street. These are hand sews this time in navy blue Chrome Excel. And these have been pretty neglected. Also, these are very, very old. So let's just get the dust off of them. And we're gonna go to town on some Venetian cream. These don't feel that dried out, which is good news. We'll give it a little buff. It's got a pretty nice blue color underneath all that dirt. All right, let's just brush it up. And here's the before and after. Definitely a good amount of dust on this guy, but there's a really nice blue shade underneath all that dirt. And then the Venetian cream has really restored the luster, filled it in just a slight amount. And the other thing I was noticing as I polished this, we got a little bit of the T-core effect where some of that navy blue has been rubbed off the surface and we're seeing some of the lighter undertones underneath that finish. Very unique shoe here. These are some Quoddy moccasins in black Chrome Excel, and then we have black Chrome Pack for the outsole. So it's a softer leather outsole, which is pretty funky. It doesn't have the same feel when you're walking around like on other outsoles. So it's kind of squishy. So for me, like I don't love wearing it outside on like concrete and sidewalks and stuff. If you step on a pebble, you definitely feel everything under your foot. All right, Black Chrome XL here. Cleaning that dust off makes me feel like it looks a little bit dry. So I'm thinking the Venetian's gonna do a wonder here. All right, not as dry feeling as I thought it might be. So that's good news. All right, we'll give it a little buffing. This one really doesn't need a whole lot, so I'm wondering if just a little bit of brushing might have done enough. There was a good amount of dust just sitting on top, which is not normal. I think these were just sitting around for too long. All right, so buffing that off makes it look pretty clean, really nice. And I just think a final brushing here will fix it up. Okay, before and after on these Quoddies, which they look pretty rough before, but I think it was just dust that was really affecting these because it's looking pretty good now. All right, this one is this is gonna be a problem, and this is the last pair. And I'm panting because brushing all those is making me sweat. This last pair here, this is really, really neglected, and they feel super dried out. They obviously are dirty. They look dirty. They feel dirty. They feel dried out. I wore the crap out of these and then abused them, left them sit outside for a long time. So in a normal situation, I would actually wash these. But the purpose of this video today is to see how far just the Venetian Shoe Cream can get us. So I'll just start with brushing off that dirt. It is really dusty. Ugh. I'm gonna have to sneeze. All right, super nasty shoe, but that's just dusting off the surface dirt there. It still looks really gross. I don't know if this Venetian's gonna do enough here, but we'll find out now. It's kind of immediately working. Surprisingly, like the dirt's not rolling off too bad in my fingers. I guess it is a little bit. Got a little bit of dirt coming off with the Venetian here. But it seems to be bringing that life back to the leather. Slight amount. It's pretty dirty. If that wasn't obvious. Jeez. It's just like gross to touch, to be honest. This is pretty gnarly. These should be probably just thrown out. You guys see these? They're so disgusting. It's starting to look more like leather and less like dirt. It kind of feels like chalk, which is really, really gross. But I think it's kind of working, surprisingly. Definitely a lot of other issues than the shine on this guy. All right, so we got a lot of Venetian on here. And I think that the conditioner polish itself will pull out some of that dirt. So as I buff this in the next step, I bet we get this looking pretty nice. It's kind of seeming like it wants to be nice underneath all the dirt. So let's find out here. The plug feels a little dry. Okay. It's starting to look leathery. That's good. Still not particularly nice, if I'm honest. Just looks really dried out. All right, let's take a look at that. Ugh. It's still really gross, and you can see the hand stitching is also popping because I've worn these so much. It just sort of probably needs a full repair, like a rebuild or just a new pair altogether. But again, these are one of the first pairs of anything that Oak Street Boot ever made. So they're that old. I don't remember when he opened, but when they started up, I wanted to pick up a pair to support them. So this was the one I got, and I loved them. They were really comfortable for me. In fact, I think they were actually a little narrow for me, but these being an unlined shoe, you can see where my foot has sort of gone over the outside of the outsole here on the the exterior, like on the outside edge of the shoe. So I think my foot was just actually a little too wide for this, but because it's unlined Chrome Excel, the leather like really molded to my foot. So these were my most comfortable pair of anything for a very long time. I remember walking around in the rain in these and doing all sorts of stuff. I'd wear them all the time. And I think just the amount of wear that I put on them made them even more comfortable. And again, I think that has something to do with them being an unlined shoe. So let's see here. Restoring my, or trying to bring these back to life, resurrect them from one of my favorite pairs with just a little bit of Venetian. So I think it's done. It's obviously a big transformation. I still think even after that, it's definitely much improved and a pretty dramatic difference. They're kind of nice looking-ish. I think the stitching needs some work, but also I think these really just need like a bath. I think there's just so much dirt on here that it's pretty gross. But a good opportunity for me to show you what the Venetian does, because it does have a bit of cleaning properties to it, as well as having some of that wax to give you some more luster and just liveliness to the surface of the leather. Polishing all those boots was a pretty big task, and it's the next day now. I wanted to see what some of this stuff looked like after it's sat for a bit. So for example, the Harvest Inferno leather, I wanted to see how dark it was after the fact. It actually looks pretty similar to how it looked yesterday. And the other one that darkened up quite a bit was the Natural Shell from Viberg. It seems to have lightened up a tiny bit, but it's still much darker than it was beforehand. If you were also curious as to how much Venetian cream I used, so for those 25, half of a pair, so it's about 12 boots, I'm at this amount on the bottle still. So there's plenty of Venetian cream in these 6-ounce bottles. So as far as takeaways, I think the biggest thing with the Venetian cream is it does have some mild cleaning properties, but I think we've hit the limit as to how much it can take off, especially with those last boat shoes from Oak Street. There's just way too much dirt on there. So something like that would be more appropriate, just to actually soap and water it and then condition it with something like the Tanner's Blend. We did get to see a little bit of some of the cleaning properties in the Venetian cream. The other thing that I was really happy with on the Venetian, there's actually two more things, but the amount of fill that it has. So on these Roy boots from Context, the Chrome Excel has really become much more filled in and smoothed out. And then it's also nourished the feel a little bit more back to life. It was sort of chapped feeling before, but that Venetian has really made the leather feel much more pleasant. And then the last thing, of course, very obvious, is the luster. So I've got the 1,000 Mile boots here. You can see just how bright and shiny this has become with that light application of Venetian and then buffing and brushing. So for me, I've pulled out on my table here some of my favorites, some of the stuff that I think has transformed the most. So the first off is that 1,000 Mile boot in brown Chrome Excel. Very, very dusty, and these are very old, but I'm really impressed with how nicely the Chrome Excel has worn in. And there's another Chrome Excel that I thought did really, really well. This might be my favorite one. The natural Chrome Excel diesel boot really filled in nicely, and in fact beforehand it was pretty dirty looking and kind of chapped feeling, and then very dull. I think the Venetian has performed very nicely on all three of those aspects. Another one that was really interesting to me was this Harvest Inferno, and of course these boots are really dirty, so I think if I were to have appropriately taken care of these beforehand and sort of applied a little bit of Venetian cream every so often, I wouldn't have had as much dirt. I think some of the waxes in the polish would help prevent the leather from getting dirty. Having said that, this Harvest Inferno is a pretty open up. It's not a nubuck, but it kind of has this like more open sort of nubucky vibe to me. It's a full grain leather, but it's very light, and it seems to be very dry inherently. So there's not so much wax and oil like in the Chrome Excel. So by applying the Venetian cream, you're gonna make the leather a little bit darker. The thing I originally liked about this Harvest color was just how vibrant and light it was. So I wasn't really interested in darkening it too much. So if you wanna keep something sort of a light color, more vibrant, I wouldn't apply any product to it. You might have to baby it much more. And the other interesting takeaway for me on the Shell Cordovan was just how dark it became after applying a little bit of polish. So like on these Vibergs here, every time I've done any sort of treatment, even with just water, this veg tan leather tends to get darker as the moisture is imparted onto it. But as it dries out, it has lightened up a significant amount, but it's still much darker than it once was. The other interesting thing that I noticed is by applying moisture or Venetian cream in this example, the color almost gets a little bit more vibrant. It's almost like some more orange colors come through just with a little bit of moisture. So like I said, I've done a video in the past where I polished these boots up with just water and brushing, and the color became much more golden. And the last one that I was very impressed with results-wise, maybe it's a little bit more of a selfish reasoning here. The boots that I wore for my wedding, these brown Chrome Excel Alden Roy boots, they're a plain toe boot with the berry last and the crepe sole. I'm really happy with how the right boot filled in, but I've got that scuff on the left. So I'm gonna have to take a little bit of extra work to that left boot to see how it does. But I'm really happy with how the Chrome Excel is filling in just from that Venetian cream. So I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think. Which of these pairs you think has improved the most? Or maybe which one that you're now inspired to polish yours up with some Venetian cream. So we do have some more of the Horserump Venetian Shoe Cream still available. These are now available in 6-ounce bottles that I think is just about the perfect size. And like I said, after polishing up 12 of these, I've maybe used about 1/8 of a bottle. So this will last you a good amount of time. And I'd be really curious if you could leave a comment on which of these pieces of footwear that you thought transformed most dramatically. Of course, I picked out my favorites here, but I'd be really curious to hear what you think. If you got all the way through the video here, thank you so much. Hope you guys have a great day.